Welcome to Making the Case for Long-Term Investment in the Development of Diverse Young Leaders. I'm Cathy Jordan, Children in Nature Network's Director of Research. CNNN's mission is to lead a global movement to increase equitable access to nature so that children in natural places can thrive. Today's webinar is focused on effective approaches to developing the capacity of youth and young adults to take on leadership roles in the movement to increase that equitable access. This is the third in a regular series of webinars called Making the Case, each one paired with a themed issue of our Research Digest, our monthly emailed publication featuring brief findings from hot-off-the-press research. You can sign up for that digest at the URL on this slide, which is also going to be provided in the chat. The digest special issue on youth leadership development was emailed at the beginning of October to subscribers, and it's available on CNNN's website. The Research Digest and this webinar series are two legs of the three legs of the research stool at CNN. The other, and most foundational, is the Research Library, which houses over 800 summaries of research articles written in accessible lay language. The links to the Research Library, as well as the Research Digest, are in the chat. Research is one way of knowing if, how, and why something works. On-the-ground experience is another. Research and practice ideally should inform each other and challenge each other and complement each other. The Making the Case webinars explore an issue from both a research and a practice perspective, encouraging a dialogue between these two ways of knowing. The format we'll use today will hopefully facilitate this research and practice exchange. I'll provide some information about how researchers are looking at efforts at the intersection of youth development and the environment. Our first featured guest, CNNN's Manager for Community Leadership Development, CJ Goulding, will describe CNNN's Natural Leaders program with an emphasis on its advanced strategies for sustaining youth leadership engagement. In other words, we're going to zoom in on examples of and the rationale for leadership strategies that call for a sustained investment by the Leadership Development Program and the young leaders. We'll then hear from Victoria Fabian-Serna, founder and co-leader of North Texas Kids Outside and one of CNNN's natural leaders. We'll then have about 25 minutes for a chat. Given the number of participants on the call, we're going to be using the chat and a poll to engage you. We'll choose as many of your questions as we can to pose to our panelists during the question and answer section at the end. Tracking those great questions and comments can sometimes be a little daunting on our end, so we're going to try an experiment and ask you to code your comments and questions as you see on this slide. You can use more than one code at a time, as long as you're judicious about that. These codes are also being posted in the chat. So if you want to offer information about your leadership program, you would first say #PROG and then make your comment. If you wanted to offer a comment about an advanced leadership development strategy you use, it would be #STRAT. If you want to offer a comment or ask a question about research you use or research you need to make the case for leadership programming or programming that's important for you, then you would say #RES. And at one point, Victoria is going to ask you to make a commitment to action. And so in response to her, you would say #ACT. And then at any point during this webinar, if you want to pose a question that we would ask during the question and answer section, please label that #QA. So for example, you might say #QA, Victoria, what was the key ingredient of your Natural Leaders Program experience that led you to become a leader in the field? So we'll see how that works. Thanks for your cooperation on that. And one more little piece about chat etiquette. If you wish to correspond with another webinar attendee in the chat, which is a great way to involve each other and share information, please just start your response with their name. So if Denise writes, I'm looking for tools to measure the impact of my internship program, and Roger wants to say something back to her by way of advice, he would say, Denise, here at Stony Ridge, we use, blah, blah, blah. So please follow those chat etiquette rules as best you can. And finally, some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. Please note that all attendees are on mute throughout the webinar. And once again, please use that chat to ask questions or make comments. So we'd like to find out who you are and what is your intersection with this topic of diverse youth leaders and sustained strategies to develop those leaders. First, we'd like to ask, what age continuum do you work with? Anna, can you run that poll for us? There we go. So what age continuum do you work with? And we'll leave this open for just about 30 seconds. It looks like we've mostly have K-8 folks with some high school and early college as well, a little bit of young leaders and other. Thanks, Anna. Can you run the next poll? This one is asking, what's your association to young leaders? Direct programming, resource development, career development, or other? And it looks like we've got quite the majority of direct programmers. So that's great. I've got a lot of practitioners. We've got some career development folks and some resource development as well. Okay, and our last question is, what sector do you work with? So nonprofit, for-profit, government agencies, education, or other? Okay, so we've got mostly nonprofit and government agencies, a little bit of education. Okay, well, thanks for telling us a little bit about yourself. That's much appreciated. And let's start talking about the research a little bit. Let's establish why youth environmental leadership is so critical. A study from about 8 years ago showed that recent high school seniors, compared to the same age group 30 years ago, report being less likely to recognize that our environmental resources are being depleted. They're more likely to assume that it's government's job to fix these issues, and they're less likely to engage in conservation behaviors. We also know that young people, and particularly young people from diverse backgrounds, will be making up the largest portion of our population. It's critical that we reach them with effective strategies to develop their motivation for and their capacity to lead these change efforts. So let's talk about what we know from the research. How is the research sector thinking about youth leadership? What do we know from the research? A lot of research relevant to our topic focuses generally on the intersection of nature experiences and youth development. For example, how youth, group wilderness adventure trips build resilience, communication skills, collaboration skills, conflict management skills, self-efficacy, etc. These are all skills that are important in young leaders in the environmental and children and nature movement, but these programs are not specifically environmental leadership programs. There's also a lot of research on how to grow an environmentalist, how to build capacity and motivation for environmental behaviors and actions and decision-making on the individual level rather than the leadership level. Some have created age-based models about the importance of nature play experiences in young children to establish love of nature, participating in outdoor programs to build skills and knowledge in middle childhood, and then experimenting with conservation roles as teens to establish values and attitudes, and developing an identity as an outdoor person and someone who's concerned about nature as a young adult. One study has been particularly helpful in my thinking about youth environmental leadership. It's by Sullivan and Silversteins, and it's called Conservation Leadership, a Developmental Model. They created a developmental model based on a really rich qualitative study of diverse teens and young adults participating in immersive conservation experiences. Their focus was on the transition from, as they say, being individuals who care about the environment to people who practice conservation, then to conservation leaders who leverage their individual efforts to influence multitudes to preserve and protect and restore the natural environment. So they talk about 3 domains, which are down the side of this slide: action, which we might also call behavior, motivation, which we might also call emotion, and understanding, which we could also say is knowledge. These are interconnected, and they present at all phases of development. They also talk about 4 phases of development, which you see across the top of this slide, that generally relate to degree of nature-based experience, but not necessarily age per se. And that's an important difference in their model versus others, which tend to be age focused. They use the metaphor of a seed, a sprout, a blossom, and propagate to describe these developmental phases. They also talk about development being cumulative, adding new actions, motivations, and understandings to those that already existed, not replacing them. So growth is a deepening within each domain as the young person generally moves forward in their developmental trajectory. So it's deepening in any one area and a forward motion overall. The kind of actions, motivations, or understandings move from simple and concrete to deeper and more complex and more focused on influencing others and systems rather than being at the individual level. For example, technical skills are learned at all phases of development from seed to propagate, but they may start with learning to pull invasive species, then they progress to learning to leave no trace, then they progress further to navigating government systems or advocacy or research skills. Utilizing a few specific studies addressing youth environmental leadership development, but also borrowing from the more general literature about youth leadership development, not specific to nature or the environment, I'm going to offer some recommendations for programming. The first one is be place-based. And that's really relevant, I think, to the second one that I'm going to talk about, which is about relevance. So you want cultural relevance, which is sometimes also place-based. But at any rate, leadership models really need to align with the sort of geographic connectedness that youth feel to their own environments and align with their worldviews and their cultural experiences. The next recommendation is about scaffolding. Meet participants where they're at developmentally and based on their experience in nature or with environmental issues, not simply their age. And listen and really realize that young person's potential. What can they provide by way of strengths and assets that you can then build off of in that scaffolding kind of way? The next recommendation is about comprehensive, immersive, and sustained. Attend to all areas like action, motivation, and knowledge domains simultaneously, not sequentially, driving development deeper within each domain as is appropriate for the developmental level of the individual. Attending to all the above practices can't happen in short-term or one-off sorts of programs. This argues for an investment in more sustained, longer-term, and immersive experiences. And then the last one that I want to mention is peer-to-peer learning and connection. This is a feature, I think, really specific to some important leadership strategies that we're going to move into in just a minute. But really the outdoor environment and the sorts of peer leadership programs offer an opportunity for peers to really build off of each other's assets and strengths. So now we're going to get to kind of the ground truthing part of our webinar. Here's where we hear about leadership programs on the ground and to what extent the research and practice reflect or are responsive to each other. So I'm going to turn it over to CJ Goulding, CNNN's Manager for Community Leadership Development. Thanks for being with us, CJ.
Absolutely. So our Natural Leaders Network and the Fresh Tracks program, which the Natural Leaders Network is a partner in, have an emphasis on youth leadership development in the context of the outdoors. And so this involves us providing training and professional development opportunities for trained leaders ranging from 15 all the way up to 28 and 29. And not only providing this initial training, but ongoing support in spaces for peer-to-peer mentoring in this nationwide network. This network, which enhances and supports that idea of peer-to-peer learning models that Cathy just referenced, now has over 380 natural leaders working in about 200 communities in almost all 50 states. And natural leaders who have participated in this training have taken some of those resources and connections and started programs of their own that impact far many more young people across the country and across the world. So again, like I said, the three main components are the initial training, the ongoing support, and peer-to-peer mentoring. And I just want to take some time to highlight how those reflect some of the research that Cathy has mentioned that go into or that provide a basis or argument for youth development. So again, our initiative is called the Natural Leaders Network. So first, it's grounded in environment. It's grounded in the context of nature and the communities that these leaders are coming from. So our model, our logic model, is based in where they're coming from, both in terms of location and in terms of their culture. It's focused on the leaders. It's focused on their investing in them and their ability to create change. And it's focused on the aspect of the network, so that peer-to-peer connection across the country. The training is scaffold. The training and personal development is scaffolded, and I'll share a little bit about my story in a little while as to how I've experienced that. So individuals can join as participants and then become trainers and then move on to taking additional leadership roles within the organization or supporting additional leadership roles in general in the movement. This enhances the ability of that or the efficiency of that peer-to-peer idea. So these young leaders are not learning from. There's no sage on stage. They're not learning from someone who is just giving them information and moving on, but they're learning from other leaders who are sharing this information. They're coming together and cross-pollinating in a sense to make sure that folks are getting the most information that they can. This leads to increased leadership and increased engagement from these leaders. So with the understanding that they're not joining something where they're being taught by someone else, but they're learning and there's a mutual exchange going on. There's a connection that's built that allows leaders to collaborate, to form personal friendships, and to be a source of support for each other as they advance and continue to have an impact in the conservation and environmental fields. There's also the idea of capacity building, both that we have existing in terms of allowing these leaders to take on leadership roles after our initial trainings, being part of advisory councils and guiding our work and direction in our conference, in our yearly initiatives and things of that nature. And we're looking to increase that capacity moving into the next year as well. So making it so that this experience or the experience that they have is not just one initial training, one initial program that might be immersive and comprehensive, but that it's scaffolded again beyond that, so that it gives them additional opportunities to be involved and to grow in the role that they take. One of the things that our leadership hopes to support is the idea of being culturally relevant and sharing the knowledge of each other's culture. And I think this investment in young leaders as individuals and as who they are allows us to support them in whatever action they want to take to create change in their communities. So whether that's local government, as listed, as shown on the bottom, or it's environmental stewardship, the investment in young leaders as individuals and their connection helps springboard them into future opportunities. And just a quick brief segue into a quick brief introduction into my story and how that fits for me. Based on this research, I've been I started off as a participant in the Natural Leaders Network program and was able to grow in capacity due to scaffolded programming by becoming a trainer in our same programs. And then in working in that increased capacity again by working with the Children in Nature Network part-time, and eventually graduating to the position I now hold full-time and looking to create spaces where other leaders can follow a similar path. So for me, that has provided an opportunity for continued investment, and working with the Children in Nature Network has been a way that I'm able to support that process happening for other leaders as well. With that being said, I would like to share with share this screen time with Victoria Serna, a friend. We talk about lifelong peer-to-peer connections, and Victoria is one of those folks who I feel I've made a connection with, and the co-founder and organizer of North Texas Kids Outside.
Awesome. Thank you, CJ. Thank you guys for the opportunity to be here. I want to share, like CJ said, I actually met him through Outdoor Nation, but then we became really good friends through Natural Leaders, and I credit a lot of the opportunities that I've been able to have today to my experiences within Natural Leaders. So I wanted to start this section and kind of tell you just a little bit about my journey and how that relates to leadership development. And then we will talk about some of the things that I think are really important for young leaders, and we'll have a call to action. So my story, I wasn't super outdoorsy. I was in grad school and I liked being outdoors, but didn't really have any special skills or anything. And in grad school, an organization called Outdoor Nation, they were reaching out and they were engaging millennial leaders and wanted to get them excited about starting a project in their community. And so I have some education background. I'm a trained teacher, and this was really exciting to me. And so I became involved with Outdoor Nation. Through that experience, won a grant to be able to start. I had this idea for a club, and because of my experience as a teacher, I saw, student success is directly impacted by the relationships that the school community forges with families. So I wanted to create a club where a young single girl, I had this idea to take families out, and I was going to introduce them to camping and outdoor activities. And that led me to some work with Texas State Parks and their Texas Outdoor Family Program. And then I, through that, met some of the Natural Leaders, learned about the program. I was a participant in Natural Leaders, and then I had the opportunity to come back as a trainer for that program. And then the next year was able to come back as a mentor with CJ and another Natural Leader, Sarah, to the current group of trainers. And after that, realized that my husband and I were ready to start a family. And so now we co-lead our family nature group, NTKO, together. And this photo that you're seeing is a really good representation of what our outings typically look like. We have a very diverse group of people that come out with us, and all of these people, with the exception of a few, I met them just by doing some grassroots work and going out and taking a leap and introducing myself. And this picture is really special to me. I was 3 months postpartum with our second child, but also the other ladies that are on this trip were either 9 months pregnant or they were also nursing a small child. So I really took my experience with Natural Leaders and Outdoor Nation and everything to heart, and it became a part of who I am, and it became a part of the culture that I work to create with others. And so that I try to reflect that in what I do. And I think one of the, if I were to think about what makes me want to stay involved, or what was the thing that got me to stay a leader with these different organizations. For me, it's the people, and it's the connection to the people, and it's the investment of time and energy and emotion and passion that was invested in me, and that was, I just felt was genuine from the beginning. And I've told CJ this many, many times before, but I just feel like every time I'm working with this group, even if it's folks that I've never met before, it feels like going home. And I think as organizations and as groups, we can learn a lot from that, because I think when we're working to get people outdoors, there is some kind of an emotional connection that happens that encourages folks to care more about being outdoors and want to continue to get outdoors. And my personal opinion, what I'm learning, having recently been through a situation where I didn't feel the connection, and it was a very difficult situation, and I decided to leave it because I know that I've had connection before, and I know the type of connection I want to have in the work that I do moving forward. I do think that connection to people is extremely important, and nature provides a really great setting, and it provides a really great content. But I think if we're going to engage people and we're going to want them to stick with us, and we're going to want them to come along with us when they're 9 months pregnant or when they're, nursing a young baby. I think it's that time that we put in with them up front. And so, the peer mentoring with natural leaders has been really crucial. I've been on phone calls with several of them where we chat and talk and we keep in touch. The ability to learn from my other peers has been awesome because I can kind of put myself and see myself in what they're doing, and that's helped me to learn and grow. So that's my story. And again, I would just say that connections to people, I believe, are going to move us forward. And I would encourage your organization to, if you're ready to maybe change your leadership program, or if you're ready to start something new, one of the first questions I would encourage you to ask is our organization truly ready to engage a different group of young leaders? Or what resources do we have in place? What people do we currently have in place that are going to be in charge of engaging these diverse leaders? And are they really ready for the commitment and for the deep investment that it takes to sustain a leader with your organization? And I think once you've kind of tackled those questions, I think everything will fall into place. I had another note that I wanted to share. I just think sometimes that phrase that we used earlier, which I think is important, is, research says to meet people where they are. And that's something I have been just trying to wrap my head around. I think it's very broad. And I think it deserves a second and third look where we really ask ourselves, what does it mean to meet people where they are? And people, we're so different. I'm a trained researcher, and we can't, always put people in a lab and study everything, and it doesn't work out as well as we'd hope. And that's great because we're so different. And so one leadership strategy might not work for a particular leader that would work for someone else. And so really, really asking people, where are they and what are they wanting and how do they want to invest and what are their future goals? And just keeping those in mind as you continue to work through your leadership programs. That was what was really beneficial for me, was that I truly feel like with natural leaders and with, friends that I've made in other spaces, that they don't just see me as, Victoria, I'm here to meet these certain metrics. They see me as Victoria, I'm here with my whole self. And when I show up, they're willing to accept me as I am and then help me to continue to grow and move forward. So I would just encourage all the groups, please invest in your people and figure out where they are, what needs they have that might need to be met before they can jump and make that connection to the outdoors, and just continue to learn from them as you go. And then our call to action, and we would love to learn from you before we go into our question and answer, is how can you, either as a leader to organization or just as an individual in your community, how can you commit to enhancing and sustaining leadership development for youth, whether it's in your community or your organization? And if you will use the code #ACT in the comments, that'll allow you all to have a discussion, but that'll allow us as well to see what you're thinking. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Victoria, and thanks, CJ. It was great to hear your stories of your own leadership journeys, some of which I didn't know, CJ, so it was nice to learn more about you as my colleague. As people start to think about what they could write in the chat for their commitment to action using #ACT, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to get us started. There are two in the chat, and let's take this second one first. Craig is asking, can you speak to the needs for connecting with nature and developing natural leaders in inner city, under-resourced neighborhoods? So I'd love to hear both CJ and Victoria. I'd love to hear both of your opinions. CJ, do you want to start with that question?
Sure. Well, I think first, based off on my understanding of the question, when it says needs for connecting with nature and developing leaders, I think there's always a need. I'm not sure if that's what the question was asking, but there's always a need for the understanding of one's environment. I completed a master's in urban environmental education, and one of the things that we learned and focused on was the idea that nature and environmental education is never lacking, even if one grows up in a space where the outdoors or the typical outdoors may not look like what's on the cover of a magazine. And so, doing things like block walks, doing things like a bio blitz at a local park, doing things like understanding the way that your city's water is used and where it comes from. All of those things are ways that one can connect to nature in urban locations, and you can develop natural leaders or people who have that approach to nature. So I think for sometimes it's a matter of shifting, and it's a matter of looking at nature and our environment a little bit differently, based on, I think the research talks about being culturally relevant and place-based. It's based on the place where that person and those people are growing up and what they are and what is around them. I think, like, also pointing to Victoria's point, what Victoria's talked about in terms of being the connection and meeting them as a whole person, or meeting them where they are. At times there are people, there are needs that sort of need to be addressed before someone can show up and start talking about, like, the bugs that exist in their park, or how they can connect to places like our national parks. And sometimes the investment or the understanding of how those base human needs and factors might be affecting our leaders, or how we connect to them and get that sustained involvement and direction when they can see the involvement in their whole life, and how the connection to the outdoors and connection to nature plays a role in that.
Thanks, CJ. I just wanted to follow up on one thing about what you said before turning to Victoria. I think a lot of what you're talking about here is really that idea of meeting people where they're at, and recognizing that people from different kinds of communities, whether it be rural or urban, different kinds of cultural backgrounds, and different levels of experience with the natural world, whether that be nature in the city or, backcountry wilderness, that's going to create unique needs for those individuals. And I interpreted Craig's question as, what are the more unique needs when you're working with developing natural leaders who are from inner city, under-resourced neighborhoods? And I think what you've talked about, CJ, in terms of your own experience in your graduate program and the ideas that you were given through that program, which was more of an urban, sort of setting, that I think did speak to this idea that you can really match the program to the needs of the individual around their leadership development based on understanding where they're coming from. One thing I would just add to that is we don't want to risk stereotyping. We don't want to assume that, all young people from urban environments are not connected to nature, or, haven't had wilderness experiences or whatever. So it's really good to dig in a relationship with them and understand what is their experience and what's their comfort level, and where are they at sort of psychologically in terms of this journey in their natural leadership. So Victoria, do you have comments to add to Craig's question?
Sure. I would like to echo what you just said. I was nodding my head. And what CJ said is really working first to understand the community that you're trying to reach. And one thing that I actually did make some biases and assumptions as I was starting my own group with North Texas back in 2012, where I just assumed, like, I had been this newbie outdoors person, that, other people, they're not connected to nature, so I must, bring this shiny thing and fix this for them and connect to them. And what I learned, I was very humbled when I was meeting these different families who I still keep in contact with today, who, once we got to know each other a little more, were telling me they're from Mexico, and they were telling me in Spanish how, in Mexico, we were connected to the land. In fact, we depended on the land. And so we're very passionate about the outdoors. And just, moving to the United States, we're not necessarily comfortable. We don't know where to go. We've never really been there, or, it's a little further than what we were used to back then, and all of our, our jobs. And so I very quickly learned, like, whoa, slow your roll, Victoria. You're making assumptions that you don't even know. And so after that first experience with that family, what I would encourage y'all to do, which has really helped me, is just truly go out and listen and ask questions to the different groups that you're wanting to get involved with. And I know that we often, myself included, have these different programs or these resources that we know all about. And so we're very passionate about them, and we want to provide these for everybody because we just know that they're going to love it. Take a step back from that for just a little bit, and you're not, how am I trying to say this? It's not that that's not a priority for you and that you're not meeting whatever mission it is that you have. I really encourage you to put that on the back burner for just a little bit and just go to get to know these people as people. And like CJ said, figure out what do they know? Maybe they are connected to nature and you just don't know about it. Ask them what they're wanting to do. What are some of the things that they're scared of? What are some of the things that they want to try? And, I know all of our organizations are different, and you might have different metrics that you're trying to reach. And I know there's financial strains and hiring strains and everything. But, think about starting, when we say meet people where they're at, literally go into where they are. And, I know we want them to come to us, but maybe you can figure out a way to have an event or go to something that they find is important, or maybe they're already doing something in their community, and go try to plug yourself into where they already are so that you're building trust. Because I truly believe that a lot of these groups that I've been working with in the urban environment, their main thing is about trust. That was what they wanted to know about me. They wanted to know, who are you? Why do you want to take us out? You're wanting to take our family out, but you're this single girl that doesn't even have your own family yet. How can we trust you? How do we know that you are going to keep our best interests in mind? But I can tell you from experience over these past 6 years, once I worked genuinely to get that family's trust, they called me the other week and said, hey, why haven't you planned any outdoor trips? Where are we going? What are we doing? And because I truly feel I spent that time to really invest in them as people, and I showed up to their quinceañeras, and I showed up to baptisms, and I know that's not always possible on an organizational standpoint, but I would encourage you to do something similar. Go into their community. I can call them up, and they trust and know that I have their best interest in mind. So I would just say a lot of these different groups, not to stereotype, but it's really about trust. They want to know who you are, who your organization is, before they just give you the key to their community. So I think go in, spend some time with them, and get to know them, and then allow them to show you where they feel you could make the biggest impact, and then try to connect that with your greater mission.
Great. Thanks, Victoria. There's been a little bit of discussion in the chat kind of in response to this question about the potentially unique needs of the urban inner city youth leaders. And Shannon had offered to Craig the advice of thinking about some of the barriers, like, do you even have the right clothes or the equipment? And CJ, followed with that, saying there are organizations and gear libraries, and there are grants available that are intended to do things like provide gear to decrease those barriers. And then Craig actually responded back to Sharon saying, thanks for your message. And Craig's team's working with inner city K-5 youth to connect kids with nature. And a core need is to develop young adults to mentor the young children, agreeing that the needs in the urban environment seem quite different from the suburban, rural, and wilderness environments and communities. So thanks for that conversation on this point. I'm going to skip back to a question that Rebecca raised. No, actually, I think it was Haley who raised this, that had to do with the research, and specifically, asking about get back to it here. Oh, yeah. So our research or our education team at Oceanwise has been trying to organize a research plan to gauge long-term effects of our programming. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations on how to do this? How can we measure the long-term impacts of a week of aqua camp or participating in one of our outdoor leadership programs? Hopefully a study like this will help support programs moving forward. So I'll take that one, and to start anyway, and CJ and Victoria, you can add in if you want to. I think one of the most important things that you can do as a program when thinking about how are you going to measure your impact is to have some sort of theory of action about what you're trying to do. Sometimes we call that a logic model. Sometimes it's called theory of change, but basically really zeroing in on what are the end goals that you're trying to reach through your program, and sort of backing that up to questions like, well, what's actually measurable? We might have really long-term goals like build environmental stewards as adults. Well, you're not going to be able to measure that anytime soon. But what could you measure in the near term or the immediate aftermath of your program that is measurable, that perhaps we know predicts later stewardship behavior, for example? So just get super clear about what your end goals are, and that will help to fine-tune your assessment approach. Because there are, existing measures out there around a variety of kinds of outcomes that we care about in these sorts of programs. And you may, with some real clarity, be able to zero in on some valid and reliable existing ways of measuring things. But being clear also about your end goals, as well as your, sort of logistics of what kind of access you've got to your participants, when, can you follow them over time or get back in touch with them, those sorts of things. That will also help you understand the degree to which you can do this sort of work yourself versus do you need to bring in an evaluation consultant or an external evaluator, or maybe even partner with an academic researcher in order to answer some of these questions. And I think a lot of that decision might depend on what's your purpose or what use do you intend for this information that you're gathering about your impact? Is it really just for your own use as an organization to improve your own program? Or do you want to share it with other people so that they can improve their programs, or you want to share it with other people because it might speak to, in sort of a research way, something about the impact of leadership programs on certain kinds of outcomes? The more that you want to be able to share it with other people, and the more that you want to be able to speak beyond sort of recommendations for programming, but actually drawing conclusions about the impact of leadership programs on certain outcomes, the more you're likely to need external help, whether that be from an evaluation consultant, or next stage would be an actual external evaluation, and probably the most rigorous way to do it would be to partner with an academic. So, Haley, I'm not sure if that answered all of your main point there. Feel free to comment on needs for more information about that in the chat. Victoria or CJ, do you have anything to add to that, or should we move to some other questions?
I think you covered that well.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Okay. There's lots of questions happening in the chat. As I was talking, wasn't able to follow all of those. But let's just see if we can pick one here. Let's see. I haven't read this one yet, but Eve has done a hashtag QA. So given the need for establishing trust and forming deep relationships as a key component in developing leaders, which is valuable but very time-consuming work, is there a recommended leader-youth ratio that ideally would allow time for outings and programming, as well as social support, get-to-know-you time? Or maybe put another way, is there a risk to offering more programming with less deep connections versus establishing deep connections but offering less programming, or for smaller group sizes? That's a really great question. CJ and Victoria, what do you think about that? So
I I'd like to share, and again, this is just, I've actually been thinking about this. In fact, I just had a call earlier this morning where we talked about measuring and how we have to meet certain numbers and what are our goals and what are we really trying to accomplish. Um, and again, this is my personal opinion. Right now, I'm not beholden to a certain number that I have to meet or anything like that. But I think the risk that we put ourselves in when connecting folks to nature by providing more programming that might, not be as deep as we would like is we run the risk of creating one hit wonders. And so I would say that it would just be a really important conversation for your organization to have as far as, how much programming do you want to offer and how are you measuring or how are you looking at that programming? Is it more important for you all to get as many folks connected and that might perfectly be valid? And maybe you can only have one or two events that go deeper, or do you really want to focus more deeply with a smaller group, and would that be valuable to your organization? So I'm kind of shifting my perspective, and again, I'm not beholden to anything, so I'm kind of rogue right now, but I would say that it depends on what your organization is trying to do. And I personally think for a cultural shift, going deeper and offering less programming, but providing more sustained connection, I think is very valuable versus what I have seen in the past in some different things where we want to provide a lot, but we don't go very deep. And so we end up shooting ourselves in the foot by creating these one-shot wonders that could be okay, but sometimes with organizations that might want a little more support before they're out on their own, it might create kind of a bad taste in their mouth, or they might see our program as not what we're intending them to see it as. So I know that doesn't give a clear-cut answer, but I think it's a very important conversation to have with your organization and your leadership to say, okay, here's why we're changing the way we're doing programming, and here's what we're looking for.
Thanks, Victoria. CJ, did you have anything to add to that?
Just really quickly that there's always going to be a need for diversity in programming, and I think it's about like understanding. Part of it is understanding the impact that you want to have, and some of it is in partnering. Some of it might be in partnering with other organizations to be able to capture the full scope of that scaffolding. So one organization may not be able to provide have the capacity to provide both that introductory experience and the deep investment that's necessary. But I think owning and understanding the specific place where you want to have an impact and pouring your resources into that with an understanding of how you might be able to connect those leaders to other places. I'm hesitating from using the pipeline analogy, but figuring out how those leaders can be connected in other ways is also one of those benefits. I'm looking for the specific link, but I know this is just in reference to some of the other questions that I've seen pop up. There's a study on youth engagement in urban nature, following up on more on what Craig asked, that the Forest Service has done, and Venice Jennings has led, that I'll try and find a link for to make sure it's shared, to share what those findings were in terms of engaging youth in urban environments.
Great, thanks, CJ. That reminds me that a couple people have asked in the chat about access to the slides or to information that's being shared, and we'll do a couple of things in the coming days to weeks. We will send out a PDF of the slides. I can also provide a little transcript of my introduction to the research. Someone was asking for that. And then this one takes a little bit longer, but we'll get this out to you as well. I'll prepare a transcript, so to speak, of the chat in a way that highlights for you the resources that are being shared, and provide links and that sort of thing. And CJ, Victoria, and I will look at that before sending it out to you to see if we can add even more things in response to some of your questions, not just the things that were necessarily shared in the chat. But speaking of sharing in the chat, I just wanted to thank people who are engaging, mostly with Craig, and giving more information in response to his initial question. That's really wonderful. And several of you have started to put in your hashtag ACT sort of commitments. I really appreciate your doing that. We'll look forward to looking at those a little bit more in depth after and sharing out in the transcript of the chat with you so that you can see what others are committing to doing. I have a question of my own, I guess, for CJ and for Victoria. I had sort of drawn this distinction when I introduced this topic about one common sort of youth development activity is related to sort of group cohort kinds of experiences, maybe on a week or longer adventure, maybe to backcountry, where all sorts of skills and knowledge and social emotional skills and that sort of thing can be learned. But it's not specifically a leadership development program. It's a youth development in the outdoors program, but not specifically leadership development. And I'm wondering if, in your thinking about some of the recommendations that I made and that CJ, you elaborated on in explaining the work that we do with sustained engagements or youth development or leadership development programs at CNN, can you think about ways that leadership development best practices could be integrated into these more youth development sorts of programs in a way that would give them a little bit of bang for their buck in terms of adding in some leadership development components? Any thoughts about that? Victoria, I'll start with you this time. Do you have thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I was trying to make sure I understood you.
Me as well.
One more time.
That was a long question. I'll say it in a shorter way, which is basically youth development programs in the outdoors are not necessarily leadership development programs, but are there ways that some of the best practices in leadership development, as we've been talking about in this webinar, could be integrated into more traditional youth development programs?
I'm going to take a stab at this, if that's okay. And CJ, please back me up with other thoughts. I think when working with youth and opportunity, and this is something that, again, Natural Leaders has done really well with the peer-to-peer mentoring. I think if you can incorporate, and I say this also from a classroom standpoint, where if you can get kids to be empowered and to really empower them to take ownership of some piece of that program that they're going through and to be able to share it with others, not only will that help them to internalize that content, because we often learn it better when we have to teach it to somebody else, but that can be a way to help them in that leadership journey as they're completing your youth development program.
Thanks, Victoria. CJ, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, for me, I don't. The question kind of caught me off guard because I was trying to figure out a way where youth development doesn't include the development of their leadership. So I was. That's where the question has kind of caught me off guard, and I'm not afraid to say that I'm not aware of youth development. Or I don't know I don't have an answer to like how youth development happens without acknowledging and amplifying their leadership.
Okay, interesting point. I'm thinking about some of my own children's experiences with sort of outdoor adventure programs, for example, where they really are learning a lot in that. I'm going to go back, if I can, quickly to my slide from that one study that I talked about with the domains. Yeah, this one, where they really were learning a lot about skills in the outdoors, and they were learning a lot about, I would say, in the social emotional learning skill realm in terms of interpersonal skills and conflict management and communication. And all of those things are really important for leadership development. But though that kind of experience didn't address with those young people how they might move from thinking about their sort of individual level to the more thinking about how they can influence others or change systems. And maybe I'm, maybe the two don't really go together. I don't know, but I'm just wondering if there's any ways that we could bridge that a little bit in helping kids who are experiencing, and young people and young adults who are experiencing these sorts of programs that are really kind of about their own personal development, and seeing if that can't be pushed a little bit towards moving them through that continuum of, going from someone who, cares about nature to somebody who takes action to somebody who's really trying to influence others and the system.
Yeah, I think I understand a little bit better now.
Yeah, me too. And I can see where some of the places that I've been involved in, I can see what you're saying about some of the programs, really focusing on them themselves, but not necessarily moving them towards seeing themselves as a leader for their community necessarily.
Right.
I think also it might be in the way that we as leaders, or us offering programs, the way we speak about our programs, in how we're talking to students about what they're doing when they go through this program, and the why and the who cares and how does this impact others. It might just be a simple way on how we're framing that approach, or what are we giving them to connect to after they've gone through our program, so that they can see it as part of the bigger picture.
Yeah, that sort of bigger context, I think, is an important foundation for young people to understand, how they fit in and what they can do to influence that. So we just have a couple minutes remaining, and I just wanted to acknowledge some of the great #ACT comments that are coming up in the chat, and really want to thank you for thinking about this challenge that Victoria posed for us. And I'm just going to read a couple of them, and you'll get a transcript of all of this, so you will have a chance to look at what each other are saying in more detail. But Shannon said, "I'll work to develop programs with more opportunities to connect with nature beyond one and done, and develop more sustained connections with the groups and schools we work with." Thanks for that idea, Shannon. That's really helpful, and glad that you're making that commitment. Celeste said, "I will encourage school district personnel, administrators, teachers, and board members to allow high school students to serve as cabin leaders for younger students attending residential outdoor school. This gives the high school students an opportunity to develop leadership skills in an outdoor setting." That's actually a great little response to the conversation we were just having in terms of bringing in more leadership components to a program that probably wasn't about leadership development, but was more about maybe environmental education and ecological knowledge and that sort of thing. So thanks for that, Celeste. And the last one that I'll mention there's a couple really long ones. I'm not going to read the really, really long ones. You can read them when you get the transcript. But Krista said, at Washington Trails Association, we offer a youth ambassador program that connects high school students with peers from around the state who are interested in the outdoors. The ambassadors gather for leadership training, public speaking, and independent project planning. The ambassador projects are designed to meet a need they see in their community. Some projects have been creating an outdoor club at their schools, attending lobby day events at the state capitol, recruiting volunteers to participate in trail maintenance work parties, and writing articles about their experiences in the outdoors. So thanks for making that work happen, Krista. So we are at time, and in conclusion, thanks so much, CJ Goulding and Victoria Serna, and to all of you for your great questions and your interest in developing diverse young leaders and the good work you're doing to connect kids to nature. As I said earlier, this webinar has been recorded and it'll be available via a follow-up email. We'll also send those other resources I mentioned. Please feel free to share any of that information, including the slides and the resources we'll send from the chat with your colleagues who couldn't be with us today. You'll also be receiving very soon a short evaluation survey is really important to us here at CNN. We really want to help make this Making the Case webinar series the most responsive to your needs that we possibly can. So I would really appreciate your response to that as soon as you have the time. So thank you again, CJ and Victoria. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.